Picking back up in eschatology, last week we were talking about the Gentiles and eternity. We know that Israel has a place in eternity, of course, all the way from the law up into eternity, and the Gentiles also do. And we were looking at the fact that the Gentiles actually will be part of, they will have an aspect of eternity. It doesn't relate to the promises of Israel, but God does have some promises related to the nations. So we're talking about the Gentiles and eternity. Before Pentecost, you have the Gentiles, that is all the humans, as we were talking about last week. All humans spoke with one language. We see that, of course, over in Genesis chapter 11. We then have, before Abraham, there was only one race. As we were discussing that, and remember, race has to do with your origin. There are three races today on earth. We see a reference of that over in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 32, if I recall. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 10:32 says, give no offense either to the Jews or to the Greeks. And remember, your term Greek is being used synonymous with Gentiles or to the church of God. So there's three different distinctions there specific. And now, of course, prior to Pentecost, the Gentiles did not have a promise. Although, because especially at the beginning before Abraham, there was actually the promise in regards, a general promise in regards to those who sought God, he would actually allow himself to be found. So they had to seek God at this time. The first occurrence, of course, we were talking about in the actual term Gentile is used over in Genesis chapter 10 and verse 5, where it's describing the nations. Then we have the Gentiles today, as we were talking about that also. And the Gentiles are actually equal with the Jews today. Now, that does not mean that the Gentiles receive the promises of Israel. Israel's promises belong to Israel. What that means is Israel is currently not in a place of blessing. And the blessings in regard to financial and other stuff like that is actually going to the Gentiles. So when it comes to salvation, both Jew and Gentile are actually under law, or excuse me, under sin. Therefore, they both must be saved in the same way today by believing the gospel for salvation. So Romans chapter 3 and verse 9 talks about this. But what then? Are we better than they? Not at all, for we have previously charged to both Jew and Greek that they are all under sin. That is just the reality. And of course, as it goes on, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understand. There are none that seek God. And by the way, this actually does involve specifically today because we do not seek God today. God seeks us. There's a little bit of a difference there after the day of Pentecost. So the Gentiles, like I say, and they were grafted into the tree, and the blessings are going to the nations rather than to Israel at this point. That is, the nations are enjoying the blessings that normally would go to Israel, but Israel is in exile right now because they have been, well, they've been very stubborn and they're not paying attention to God. So he sent them out into the nations just like he said he would. For if this is in Romans chapter 11, verse 15, for if they're being cast away is the reconciling of the world. And of course, this is talking about the fact that right now, to the world, because the Jews rejected their Messiah, the message of reconciliation is going to the Gentiles because of that. This does not negate God's promise to save Israel. But there is a period in time in which God is blinding Israel so that there's an opportunity for the Gentiles to actually come in. And that's what it's talking about. For if they're being cast away as a reconciling of the world, what will their acceptance be but life out from dead? So you see that they will actually be accepted back in the context here, where it's talking about. So So they do have that blessing. And of course, this goes all the way down to verse 25, as we were talking about last week with the olive tree and the branches. And the reason that they don't have those benefits right now is because they've been cut off. Because what did God say? You obey health, wealth, and happiness. If you do not obey, you're not going to get that. So they're not getting that at that time. But we do have the believing nations, those of the nations who are believing are actually getting benefits. God is now calling a people out from the Gentiles for his name. And this is where we stopped, and we'll kind of pick back up. And this is over in Acts chapter 15 and starting in verse 14, where he's talking about this. So Acts chapter 15 and verse 14, where Simon has declared how God at the first visited the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name, upon the basis of his name. That is what he is actually doing. And with these words of the prophets agree, just as it is written, after this I will return, and I will rebuild the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down. I will rebuild its ruins. I will set it up so that the rest of mankind may seek the Lord, even all the Gentiles who are called by my name. So we actually do see the nations involved in this. Now you can see a reference to this also over in Ephesians. Over in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 15. So here he's saying, having abolished in his flesh the enmity that is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace. And that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross, therefore putting to death the enmity thereof. So he separate, he dealt with the law. The law is no longer of any value in the sense that Christ completed the Mosaic law. The Mosaic law is not going to be brought back in for a short period of time so Israel can be dealt with. That's not the way it's going to work. Yes, at the beginning of the tribulation period, Israel is going to rebuild the temple and they are going to start sacrificing again, but that sacrifice is not acceptable to God. They're doing it in unbelief. And then they're going to be kicked out of Jerusalem. Oh, actually, out of the whole area at that point, because they're going to be sent over into the wilderness again for a time until the Lord actually comes. So we also then want to look at the Gentiles in the tribulation period, because the Gentile nations, that is, they will go into the tribulation period also. They will come under the seal judgments during the first half of the tribulation. So you do have some seal judgments involved with them. And you see this over in Revelation 6. And where he's talking about the seals here, and he says, now I saw when the Lamb opened the seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say, with a voice like thunder, come and see. And then he begins to talk about these horses that are coming, and look, behold, the white horse, and the one who sat upon it had a bow and a crown. Not really actually a crown. This is actually a Stephanos. This is not a crown of ruling. This is a crown of being victorious, is what it is. And this was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. And of course, he only has a bow, which is interesting as we are going through the book of Revelation, and that is a good place to reference this. That indication there without an arrow has some significance because we're going to see at the beginning of the tribulation period what is going to happen in which he's going to conquer. He's going to come in peace. Okay. So he is going to have some military might behind him, but he's going to come in peace. He's going to sign a 7-year peace covenant with Israel. And when he signs that 7-year peace covenant, it is of the type of peace where Israel will take down her walls. Right now, Israel is a walled city. So that's going to be pretty significant. And then we have the other horses where it's talking about the second seal is opened. And then we see the fiery red one, and to grant it to him is to take peace from the people. And then we have the third one, the third coming down, and he's a black horse, and on him we have a pair of scales in his hands. And this, of course, is when starvation comes in and drought and other things like that. So all these seal judgments do actually affect the Gentiles and the nations. Some Gentile believers will be killed by the harlot. Now, the harlot is the religious system that is going to bring the man of lawlessness onto the stage. Okay, so yes, the man of lawlessness, when he comes onto the stage, he is going to appear to be a very religious man. And religious, most likely, in at least some level of imitation of the actual church, because that is what Satan is trying to do right now, is imitate the church in the way that he's functioning and working. Now, the harlot is actually a mystery. Okay, so we don't entirely know what the makeup of the harlot will be at this point, but we do know the harlot will be a bunch of different religions, and it'll be one that will be worldwide and very strong. And of course, you see this during the fifth seal, where you have this. And then I open this, and let's see if he's got this black horse, yeah, with the scales, talking about many that are actually going to die. And we also have some who are going to die as a result of the harlot. 1/4 of the Gentiles are actually killed at this time. And of course, you see this is in approximately Revelation 6 is where it's talking about this, because you have wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. And a denarius, what that's basically saying is a day's wage. Now, could you imagine working for an entire day and you can purchase a little bit of wheat? And that's about it. Yeah, it's going to be very, very difficult. And we're going to have a lot of death during this time. We then also have the 10 nations rise under the rule of the first beast. Now, this is at the beginning of the tribulation period. Well, excuse me, this actually technically begins just before the tribulation period, and then they go into the tribulation period. But as they rise, and we see this in Revelation chapter 13 and chapter 17, it's also talking about this. Then I stood and he saw this beast rising, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads blasphemous names. Now, in studying this out, as we've done in the book of Revelation, we know that this is the 10 nations that are going to rise, and they're going to give the man of lawlessness their authority. As this is out, of course, he's going to come in on the harlot, which is the religious system. They're going to give him his authority. 3 of them are going to want it back, and he's going to destroy them. So that's why we have the 7 heads here. And we see another reference of this back over in Daniel. And this is realistically where it was first revealed, over in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 8, where it talks about this. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up from among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there, in this horn, there were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words, because he's actually going to rip them out. But they're going to be under the control of the first beast. The first beast will actually be a Gentile. So he's not going to be a Jew. He's going to be a Gentile. And Romans chapter 13, specifically 1 through 3, talks about this. And he says, and I stood on the sand of the sea. And I remember, in the general context of Scripture, and especially in the book of Revelation, predominantly when it's referring to sea, he's talking about people. And he's not talking about the physical sea. And as he rises up from the sea, he's going to rise out from the Gentiles and the Gentile nations. He is not going to be a Jew, in other words. Gog and Magog will be destroyed by the man of lawlessness. Now, Gog and Magog, that is described over in Ezekiel And we have Ezekiel chapter 38 and chapter 39. Both of those are actually dealing with Gog and Magog. Now, we do know that this is the king from the north, and the king from the north, which of course we also know is Russia, will actually come down and will try to take what Israel has. Because at this point, the Gentile nations are in desperate need, because they are under famine. Most of their supplies have been completely dwindled, so that, like I said, it just a day's wage for a little bit of food is what it's going to take at this point. So they're going to look at Israel. They're going to see, well, Israel has plenty, and they're going to go up against Israel. So when it talks about this, and in verse 3, this is Ezekiel chapter 38 and verse 3, and he said, "Thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal, and I will turn you around with hooks in your jaw and lead you out with all your armies, horsemen, and horses." And so we're going to have the entire nation, and it's not just Russia that's coming against, it's Russia and some of the nations that are with Russia that are going to come, because it talks about the islands in the context there. And we know one of them is Germany and another's Turkey, and there's a few other smaller nations that are going to join with Russia to come to try to destroy Israel. They are going to be completely wiped off the map. The nations are going to be completely destroyed at this point. And the man of lawlessness is the one who's going to bring that upon them. And as I've said, as we're going through the book of Revelation, which is again a really good book to go through, and I'm kind of very tempted to go back through that because it's a really good study to understand all this. This is actually it describes a nuclear war that is going to happen. And it's going to destroy Russia, and not just the armies, but they're going to go back and even destroy the cities of these places. Then we have the Gentiles in the Great Tribulation period, because of course when Gog and Gog of Magog comes down to take that, we're at the mid-tribulation part. That's 3.5 years. The man of lawlessness is actually going to be killed, but he's going to be resuscitated at that point. Okay. So during the Great Tribulation period, now this is the last half of the tribulation period, the last 3.5 years. The whole world will be under the authority of the first beast. So everybody is actually going to be under this beast's authority. Back over in Revelation chapter 13 and starting in verse 5, where it's talking about this. "And he is given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and was given authority to continue for 22 months or 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in the heavens." And then, of course, it also talks about he was granted to make war against the saints at this time. The Gentiles must worship the beast or his image, because he's also going to set up an image. And they must worship his image or the beast himself, or they are economically boycotted. So what we're going to have is a situation that is kind of interesting, especially with the technology that we see today. Now, I am not going to go as far as to say that our technology is making way for the man of lawlessness, but it is interesting how our technology could certainly be used in this way. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about where we're pushing towards electronic money. Now, you'll call it bitcoins or whatever they'll call it, but it's basically electronic money. So it will be very easy to control people, and those who do not give their alliance to the beast will not be allowed to participate in that economic system. That doesn't mean that they won't be able to get things, but basically it'll be black market is what it'll be, because they'll have their actual normal system is not the way they're going to be able to function. Now, they may also be even killed Of course, in verse 8, it talks about that, and all who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose name has not been written in those whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain before the foundations of the world. Now, this is saying that those who are these are the ones who have not been written in the book of life. That is, they have not believed the gospel. Okay? It is not saying, we do not want to misinterpret this and say, from the foundations of the world, their name wasn't written. That's not the way that this passage actually describes this. This is the Lamb who was slain from the foundation of the world. Their names aren't written in his book. That's actually the way this passage is referring to. But some of our translations kind of make that a little difficult for us to understand. And then dropping down into verse 15, so we're still in Revelation 13, and dropping into 15, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And this is actually going to be a literal idol that moves and speaks. It is not going to be a robot or anything along those lines. It's actually going to be likely made out of stone, and he will be given the authority to be able to make it to speak and cause those who do not worship it to be put to death. And in verse 17 is where it says, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. And of course, the number is 666. And we've talked about that before. This is not a secret number. This is not a microchip underneath your skin or anything along those lines. You know, because there's a lot of different excuses that have come up with the mark of the beast. When you understand the term mark here, it is talking about an actual mark that's visible. We would tend to call this a tattoo today. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a tattoo. And what I mean by that is the actual type of mark, we don't know what it comes from. There's different ways to cause marks on your skin. One of the more popular ones I've seen today is using extreme cold to basically burn an image into your skin. So there's a couple of different ways to do it, but regardless of how it's done, and the reason, of course, they do that is because you don't feel anything because it's extremely cold. But it doesn't matter. It's literally going to be 666, either on your forehead or your head, your forehead or your hand, that is, one way or the other. They're going to have to serve him. The world then comes under the vial judgments at this point. Now, Israel is out in the wilderness. And again, it's one of those things where Israel's out in the wilderness. We know where Israel is going. Scripture very clearly says where they're going. But the Gentiles are not going to worry about Israel because they need to worry about themselves. And they're going to start having a lot of problems at this point. And these vile judgments are going to come. And they also refer to them as, so here we have, then I heard a loud voice from the temple saying to the angel, go and pour out the bowls of wrath upon of God on the earth. And he went out and began to pour out these bowls of wrath upon the earth. And these are specifically dealing with the Gentiles. Now, the 144,000 will present the gospel of the kingdom. Now, this gospel of the kingdom is the message that the Messiah is coming. And it is not the message that Christ died for your sins, was buried, and rose again on the third day. That is the message that we have today and we understand. Israel does not understand that message at this point. They will when they see Christ. When they see Christ's return, they will understand that. But today, as a nation and in the tribulation period, they're not going to understand that. And that's not the message they're directly sending out. So the many of the Gentiles will be saved as a result of this too, also. Then we see this over in Matthew. Matthew chapter 25 and verse 40 talks about this, among others. And now this is in a parable, and he's talking about the king and the wedding for his son. And the king will answer and say to them, assuredly, I say unto you, inasmuch as I did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. Now, in the context here, we're talking about the end of the tribulation period, where they're coming before the king, and they're actually answering and basically entry into the kingdom at this point. And we have the sheep and goat judgment is what's going on. And there will be many who are religious who come and they say, well, I did all these things in your name. So during the tribulation period, and we know that this actually involves the harlot, there will be an element of Christianity in there. We don't exactly know how it looks, but there'll be an element of that because you can see these people coming in the way that they're making claims and stuff like that. And he's going to say, I never knew you. But the other ones, he's saying, yeah, I knew you because of what you did. You did to the least of them. You took care of them. So the Gentiles will, and of course, Revelation chapter 12 and all the way through chapter 17 talks about a lot of this information. Now, of course, we're not going through there, but he's talking about signs and wonders, the sun with the moon under her feet. And then, of course, the child then is, now here he's talking about Israel, and the child then is sent out to the wilderness at this point and protected because the child is actually taken up and she's sent out into the woman is sent out into the wilderness. And then we're going on to dealing with the Gentiles here in that particular 16 and 17 as it's talk, or excuse me, 12 through 17. They will go through the sheep and goat judgment. And of course, that's where we were just talking about over in Matthew chapter 25, where it's talking about the sheep and goat judgment. Because remember, when we go into the actual kingdom, no unbelievers will be permitted into the kingdom. That's not just Jews, but that's also Gentiles. So all the Gentiles who enter into the kingdom will be saved at that time. So when the Son of Man, so this is over in Matthew 25:31, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you well spoken of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundations of the world. And then, of course, he goes on to talk about the fact when I was hungry, you gave food, and when I was thirsty, you provided. A lot of these are going to be ones who even provided food and drink for the 144,000. The saved will then enter into the kingdom, where the unsaved, that is the goats, will be cast into the lake of fire. It does not say that they will be cast into Hades. Now, this is down in verse 41 where we see this. So he's talking to the goats here. And of course, these are the ones who have come in and they're saying, but we did all these things. We went to prison and we did all these things in your name. And he's saying, I didn't know you. Because they weren't doing it in his name. They were doing it in a religious way to make themselves so that they could earn righteousness. They weren't actually believing in God and what God says. Then he will say to those on the left, depart from me, you cursed, into eternal fire. Your word lasting, everlasting is your word eternal. Eternal fire prepared for the devil and for his angels at this point. So they will be cast into the lake of fire. Now, the lake of fire is the final resting place. So when this judgment happens, the judgment of the sheep and goat judgment, it is a judgment for the unbelievers that is equivalent to that of the great white throne for those who are sleeping. And those would be the unbelievers. They are going to be judged at this point, and they are going to be sent into the lake of fire we're at the beginning of the kingdom. So right now, the beast and the man of lawlessness reside in the lake of fire. And they're going to be cast in there with them. They will be involved in the final campaign of Armageddon. Armageddon is really a campaign of 5 wars culminating on the plains of Megiddo. Oftentimes it is misunderstood that Armageddon is a single battle, but it's actually 5 different battles that are going on that ultimately end in Megiddo. And of course, like I said, we went through that in a lot of detail when we went through the book of Revelation, because they're going to come in the plains of Megiddo. And yes, on the plains of Megiddo, there will be areas where the blood will run up to the bridle of a horse, because it is going to be such an incredible war, and so very quick. Anyway. Battle with the first beast and the image of the beast takes place in Revelation 13. And this battle starts out in Jerusalem. So this is where we have the beginning of this campaign that's going on. So you have the first beast and the image in Revelation 13, and this battle is going to take place in Jerusalem. We have the king of the south, Egypt, will push at the first beast. We see this over in Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 through 42. We have the king of the north, and this will be Italy, will go down to Egypt to help the first beast. So again, we have another one coming down, and so we've got all these wars that are going on at this point. The king of the east is going to arrive on the scene from the northeast. And the king of the east is going to be the one with the 200 million man army. So he's going to have a massive army as he comes up from that time. And we see this in Daniel chapter 11, verse 44. It talks about that, and also in Revelation 16. We can go over to Revelation. Let's go over to Revelation chapter 16 and verse 21. In Revelation 16, not 21, I wanted 12, because 21, we're throwing hailstones at that point. So that's a little bit farther down, because he talks about the 6th angel, and he pours out the vial or the bowl on the great river Euphrates, and the river is actually dried up at this point. And this is to make way for the king from the east. Okay, so he can come up this river into the valley. Or we're going to have this final culmination of all of these battles that are going on here. Christ returns when the kings of the north and the south surround Jerusalem. So we actually have what's going on is wars among the Gentiles. And then Christ is actually going to come when they come up, and they actually surround Jerusalem. And we see this over in Zechariah chapter 12 and verse 2, where he talks about that. And we can go to Zechariah chapter 2 and verse 12, or 12 and verse 2. Let's get that one right. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness for all the surrounding people when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. Then it will happen on that day, I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all the people, and all who heave it away will surely be cut into pieces, though all the nations of the earth are gathered against it. So he's going to cause them to really desire Jerusalem. And they're going to come up, and we've got battles really against the first beast and the second beast, and the harlot. She's actually destroyed at this time. And well, all the Gentile nations are coming together, and they're basically fighting for Jerusalem. They're coming in to fight for Jerusalem at this point. And that's when Christ is actually going to return. Christ will battle with them in Jerusalem, in Eden, Bozrah. We can see an example of this over in Isaiah. Over in Isaiah chapter 63, the Lord is talking about this, and starting in verse 1 and going through 4. Who is this who comes from Edom, with dyed garments from Bozrah. Now, of course, the implication is he's already been at war. This one who is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. I who speak in the righteous, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red and your garments like one who has treaded the winepress? Why? Because he's already done some destruction as he comes up. He's already crushed some of the people as he's coming into war. And we also see this again over in Revelation. Revelation chapter 19 is another example of what's going to happen here. Revelation chapter 19 and verse 15. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, and with it he should strike the nations, and he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress of the fierceness and the wrath of God Almighty. And this, of course, is when Christ actually returns. And then we have the final battle, which is a battle in Megiddo. That's when we actually have, like I said, the culmination of all of these wars that are going on. And ultimately, it works out to 5 different wars that are going on. In Revelation chapter 16 and verse 14, it talks about this. Now, it's talking about these spirits that are being sent out, and I saw 3 unclear spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. And they are spirits of demons performing signs which go out to the kings of the earth and the whole world to gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. And of course, this is talking about ultimately at Megiddo is where they're going to come. So we're going to have this massive battle when Christ returns. He's going to crush the nations. He is not going to destroy the nations, but he's going to crush them, which means the world system and the way that the nations function today is going to be completely gone. He's going to utterly destroy them. Many of the kings and many of the strong men are going to be destroyed in these wars. You know, there's not going to be a lot of strong men left at all. Now, the Gentiles will also be, of course, involved in the Millennial Kingdom, which we saw the sheep and goat judgment, which also implies that some Gentiles will go into the kingdom. So the Gentile nations will be in the Millennial Kingdom. They will enter the kingdom on the basis of their faith. Revelation chapter 7 talks about that. And of course, they have to actually believe. Revelation chapter 7, verse 9 says, After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude no one could number, of all the nations, tribes, people, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands. Now, the implication of being clothed with white robes is the righteousness. These are the ones who actually believe. That is what it's talking about in the general context here. And in verse 13, he kind of goes on and he says, Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, I don't know. So he said to me, These are the ones who have come out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So they actually believe the gospel is going to be spread out to them. Those who show evidence of their faith, they're actually going to show evidence of their faith by caring for the 144,000. And we see this again back over in Matthew chapter 25. And verse 34, where it's talking about this. Matthew chapter 25 is a very important chapter. Of course, we keep coming back to this because it's a very important chapter that's explaining a lot of this. Then the king will say to those on his right, Come, you well-spoken of the Father, inherit the kingdom prepared before the foundations of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we do these things? When did we see you hungry and feed you and give you something to drink? Said, when did we see you as a stranger and take you in, or naked, or clothe you? Or when did we actually see you sick in prison? And the king answered, and he said, assuredly, I say, if you done it to one of the least of these, now the least of these, he's talking about the 144,000. Now, granted, I didn't read that verbatim, but it can give you kind of an overview of that, where it's talking about there. So it's 144,000 that will actually be they'll show their faith as a result of their message. They will be on the earth in non-glorified bodies and able to produce. So they'll enter into the kingdom of the heavens, and they will be actually saved, but they will not be resurrected at this time. Okay, so they will still have this particular flesh that we have now, which also means they'll be able to produce, and they will start to produce children. And they will repopulate the earth at this point, and this would be in the Millennial Kingdom. And we see this in Revelation chapter 22, verses 1 through 22, where he's talking about seeing rivers of water of life and clear coming from the throne of God and the Lamb, and the tree of life that bears 12 fruits, each one yielding fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. And they will be no more curse, so the earth will no longer be cursed. But the throne of God and the Lamb, it shall be in it, and the servant shall serve him. As he goes on, there'll be no sun, because of course the New Jerusalem will actually provide light for the earth, as it describes in that. And in talking about all of the details in regards to what is going to happen in the Millennial Kingdom. Isaiah chapter 65 and verse 20 also is another area we see this. No more shall an infant from their lives, or no more shall an infant from there live but a few days, nor an old man who has not fulfilled his days. For a child shall die 100 years old, but the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. This is actually an interesting statement, because basically what it's saying, when we understand this, and we went through this in the book of Revelation, but I'll kind of brush over this again, is that during the Millennial Kingdom, I don't want to say you get a pass, but for the first 100 years, you are not held directly liable as you will be after that 100 years. And what I mean by that is that 100 years of age, you will be considered to be mature and expected to act mature at that point. Now, I'm not saying that a child can't be punished for some egregious violation of the law. They certainly will be. But primarily, it will be after 100 years where you are actually being held liable. You could kind of use this in general as the age of accountability at this time. And that's what it's talking about. Now, remember, during the tribulation period, or excuse me, during the Millennial Kingdom, you have the potential, if you enter into the Millennial Kingdom, you have the potential to live for 1,000 years with no issue for 1,000 years. Right? And that's what it's talking about here. So they will, of course, produce children, and they will have more children, and those children will then need to believe. They will live for 1,000 years on earth. The curse is actually removed. Now, of course, we see that in Isaiah chapter 65 and verse 20, where it's talking about that specifically. So this curse is actually going to be removed from the earth. This is going to be quite an interesting time on earth, because it truly is going to be a place where man is no longer under a curse. Or the earth is no longer cursed for man. So the earth will produce to its full. So food isn't going to be an issue for men at any time. We're not going to have thorns and thistles and other things like that. You're going to have plenty of food. And of course, righteousness is going to rule at this time. So it's going to be a very righteous place. In Jerusalem, the ones who are the leaders in Jerusalem, they will all be resurrected saints. From King David all the way down even to the ones who govern cities. They will actually be resurrected saints. So they will not be influenced by well, the only thing that would be there that could influence on them is the sin nature of man. Because Satan is bound and the world system is destroyed. Because when he crushes the nation, he destroys the world system. And remember, that world system is what Satan set up to actually control the sin nature of mankind. They will be beneath Christ, the church, and Israel. Revelation chapter 2, verses 26 through 28, Psalms 2, 7 through 9, and Deuteronomy 28, 13 all talk about this in the context there. They will be required to go up to Jerusalem once a year for the Feast of Tabernacles. And then we see this in Zechariah chapter 14. So they're going to come up to Jerusalem. The whole entire earth is once a year is going to flow up to Jerusalem, because Christ and his bride are going to come down from the New Jerusalem in the heavens, and we're going to have the Feast of Tabernacles at that point. The Jews will take their glory to the New Jerusalem. Now, that is the things that the nations find valuable, they will want them held in the New Jerusalem where they cannot be corrupted, where they cannot, no harm can actually come to them. Revelations 21:24 talks about that. In the context there. So let's go over to Revelation. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 20 or 21 and verse 24. The nations of those who are saved shall walk in light, and the kings of the earth shall bring their glory and their honor into it. And that's what it's talking about, those things that it finds of value. Then we also actually have the Gentiles in eternity. So the Gentiles will be in eternity. They will reside on the earth in resurrected bodies. God will be in their midst from time to time. We see that in Revelation chapter 21 and verse 3 in the context of what he's also talking about, because from time to time, God will actually be in their midst. And it'll be the same thing in all eternity. As it talks about in Revelation chapter 21 and verse 3, and I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell. And your word dwell actually means tent with them. So he's talking about the Gentiles who are here on earth, and he will come from time to time. They will be to God's glory. So they will express a proper opinion of who God actually is and what he has done. So he will have that being expressed through the Gentiles, through Israel, and also through the church.